And
Hey, Daddy, this is the man of the champions, Bill Fonzie Alfonso, giving a shout out to
Something else.
something else, Daddy.
This is Nicole Matala, Great Warrior Wolf, and you are listening to Something Else.
I'm Tony Cini, and you're listening to Something Else.
Hey everybody, it's Rich Palladino, the voice of New England, and you are listening to Something Else with Aria.
welcome to episode number 200 of Something Else. Feast your ear holes on this week's episode as we take a look at NWA Total Nonstop Action, episode number 49 from June 11th, 2003 from Nashville, Tennessee. My name is Aria, and joining me, as always, is the Shark Boy to my Devon Storm. It's Cindy. Cindy, how the hell are you doing today?
I am back home from vacation. I took the day off work because of jet lag. I am ready to go.
How was Chicago? Did hopefully your trip to Chicago was better than my trip to Chicago and home from Chicago. Man, everything in Chicago when I was there was great. Everything to and from Chicago sucked.
So far, so good.
Okay, great. So, so yeah, we are at episode 200, and I am aware because I know I can see the number of people who actually listen to the show as well as anybody else does. I'm also aware if you include all the other shows I do, I'm really at like 320, but we're not counting that. This is like, as Trey and I talked about on the show last week, it's like the numbered UFC shows. You know, there's only 330 or however many UFC shows, even though there's also 6,000 UFC fight nights as well. But we don't count those in the UFC number. In the same way that there's 106 Smoky Mountain shows and half a dozen spot shows and bonus shows and all that, we're at 200. So with that, you know, thank you to anybody who's checked us out over past 3 years ish. I think it was August of 2022 was when I started with our prior co-host, which the less said the better about him. Um, and yeah, we're still here, 200 episodes later. Somehow, like, I had to laugh because, like, I really should have tried to add a co-host a long ass time before I did, but it's like it was that desire to like is a desire to sit here and like add the TNA show that I'm like, you know what, maybe I should add a co-host. And Trey, by the way, thanks you a lot for the fact that, when I asked if there's somebody out there that wanted to do TNA, you responded before he did.
Yep.
Because that poor guy, we're already worried about his mental health. He would have lost his friggin' shit if we had him watching TNA every week.
Well, let's just say my bullshit tolerance is a lot higher than both yours.
Oh, apparently. And I think, like, I don't know, what other wrestling do you watch other than this? Like, I'm imagining, like, this isn't the only wrestling you watch in a given week.
Um, Oddly enough, this is the only full show that I watch every week.
Okay, so maybe that explains it because, like, we're doing Mid-South from 84, which, as we mentioned, like, that show's on fire. We're doing World Class from 84, which, okay, it's not world class from 83, but it's still pretty damn good. And we're still right in the middle of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. So Trey and I are watching a lot of really good shit and talking about a lot of really good shit. So when we get to this show where it's like I got zero tolerance because I'm too busy watching all the good shit to like accept the really bad shit. It's like, and it's like and there are a lot of weeks like TNA at this point, they bottom out at 7,000 buys per week when they're on the bottom is that the least they do. I don't know how the hell some of these shows lead to people buying, but lead to 7,000 more people buying the next week. And
Spite.
that kind of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say spite.
That's kind of where I'm at because I'm like, that is my best guess that it is at this point the most easily accessible non WWE pro wrestling to a US fan. And I get it if you ask around at the time, it's like, oh, well, you could just buy ROH DVDs. Oh, you could get tapes from Japan. Oh, you could get tapes from Mexico. You could tape trade it. I don't know if I'm sure torrenting was a thing, but like, I didn't know torrenting was a thing until like 2009 myself. But it's like at the end of the day, most people either had no idea what ROH was or like I was a few years later, like I'm not going to spend $20 multiple times a month on new ROH DVDs for shows. And so it was difficult to get into that. And it's like I didn't have the ability to tape trade Japan tapes or Mexico tapes or whatever. So it's like in some way I see it. This is the most easily accessible alternative to WWE. Because at this
And it's
point,
got people that you know.
yeah, like A, it's got people you know, and B, it's like there's no other. This is the closest you're getting otherwise to a nationally televised wrestling show. And this is also the time when WWE is starting to scale back on the real dumb attitude era type bullshit because like honestly, like you could blame Katie Vick for that. Like, well, yeah, they do some stupid shit after that too, but like that was pretty much the epitome of the okay, we've gone a little too far now. Let's scale this shit back a bit. Whereas TNA with Russo is like, yo, bro, let's double down on that. Um, Now it
And
kind
yet,
of leads
I don't think
into
they've reached any part in
hmm?
TNA. We've never reached necrophilia.
No, but we get to that. And
We've
by the
never
way,
reached necrophilia.
spo spoiler, we are not going this long, but we do get that awful Abyss Jim Mitchell storyline from 2006 to 2008. It went like 16 months where it's like Abyss shot his dad in the head. So he went no, was it Abyss's mom shot his dad in the head and Abyss took the blame for it? But then it turned out Abyss's dad is Jim
Yeah.
Mitchell, who was like 5 years older than Abyss. And then they brought in Judas Macias as his half brother. And, that poor family reunion with Abyss, Joseph Park, and Judas Macias, you know, it is what it is. And then, oh yeah, and the whole point of it was Sting was trying to uh, get Abyss to stop being this crazy monster. And so he ends up fucking up Abyss's life storyline wise forever. Um, so that kind of leads into what Dave was talking about this week in the Observer, because in honor of this being, right before the 1 year anniversary show, Dave writes a pretty good little story about TNA and basically talks about every single lie that TNA told to either fans, reporters, or the other wrestlers over the past year. Between Jeff and Jerry Jarrett claiming that they themselves are funding it, even though that turned out to be a lie. Between the fact that Russo had nothing to do with it, even though everyone knew that Russo was involved with the writing, well beforehand, before it became like a well-known and official. Um, Things about how they don't care about TV except the fact that they were pretty much trying to get on TV from day one and all this other shit. It's like, and Dave did a great job basically breaking down every lie that they told over the past year. And, so if you have an observer subscription, it's whatever show or whatever issue from June of 2003 is also talking about the WWE Bad Blood pay-per-view because it's that show. Um, Elsewhere, the heat between Jeff Jarrett and Raven is finally settled down. Even Raven's friends are saying that he is being incredibly unprofessional. And so before the show, they buried the hatchet. Um, and then, as we mentioned last week, Desire suffered a fractured tailbone and a broken vertebrae during a match taped for Explosion, which is the real reason she's not on this show, but they covered up during an angle later on. But like I said, like I said last week, I don't think we see Desire again, or if we do, she gets injured again on an Explosion match later on. Because for some reason, my memory was that happened in November, and we're obviously not in November.
She sticks around, but in a non-wrestling role until April 2004.
Okay.
Spoiler alert.
Not even sure why, because I don't think she's really adding much to the damn show. But anyway, on to the show. The show starts with, as we mentioned, the most consistently great part of the show, the 5-minute video package recapping what's going on. And then we go outside for a Raven promo where he says tonight he will achieve his destiny and become world champion. However, because he cost D'Lo Brown the world title, he wants Julio De Niro to go take care of him so he doesn't interfere in the match. Then Julio promised to break D'Lo's face, and while he's saying that, D'Lo runs up in clear full view of Julio De Niro and attacks Raven from behind, and then beats Julio into the arena. Thoughts on this stupendous opening of the show?
Kind of figured this was going to happen because D'Lo pretty much wanted to get after Raven or somebody close to Raven, and he does. Shall we just move on?
So, D'Lo and Julio fight to the ring for our opening match, which is, of course, D'Lo Brown versus Julio De Niro with Alexis Lurie. In the ring, D'Lo hit a Hurricane Rana and went to give an interfering Alexis a catatonic, but Julio broke it up before missing a super kick by 5 feet. And even though the heel crowd, or the heel section of the crowd, which is the loudmouths in front of the camera mostly, they were behind Julio in this match, but even they had to break into a "you fucked up" chant. Julio makes up for that by hitting a tope suicida where he fell gracefully into D'Lo's open arms. Now, then we get to the stupid shit. Julio puts a chair around D'Lo's head, and he runs him into the ring post. Now, most promotions, even up to this point, that's a hardcore angle. It is an angle that, maybe not fully popped the territory, but it's a hardcore angle. That's to take somebody out for a little bit of time, and they're going to come back stronger than ever and get their revenge. In this match, it was a transition move. D'Lo sidesteps a corner charge and made his comeback. At least he occasionally acted like his neck hurt. Alexis hit a top rope tornado DDT that somehow the referee did not see. D'Lo kicked out anyway and won with the sky high. This was like in some ways, it was very similar to the D'Lo Brown AJ Styles match last week. They went out there trying to have a great match, but this match just lacked an execution. Like, Julio has no credibility at all. Like, he's won one match against Jeff Jarrett, and that was not because he was a superior wrestler. And anyway, I give this match a 4.0 out of 10.
I gave it a 5.0 out of 10. I thought it was just a solid match. I did like the DDT from Alexis. The chair shot, the chair, neck angle threw me off, and I didn't quite like it that much. But this is mainly trying to get D'Lo. They got to be going for a D'Lo Raven feud. Spoiler, that doesn't happen.
It's to give D'Lo a win on, and I mean, that's fine. We want to give D'Lo a win on TV. That's great. He just had to fucking win. He didn't have to have all this excessive crap in order just to have him win a match.
Mm-hmm.
Then Don West announces that tonight, Kid Cash is in a 3-on-1 handicap match against Eric Watts, Trinity, and Goldilocks. Is it too late to quit watching this show?
No. You already started. This is episode 200. You got to give the people what they want. They want to see you talk about this show.
I don't mean this particular episode of this show. I mean, quit this show entirely. Like the only thing I'm seeing, and I said this, I think I said this off air before the last show, it was like at least at this point we're almost halfway done. There's 111 episodes, and this is episode 49. So it's like we are nearing the halfway point. He also said that Paul London was in either London or Japan. So Chris Sabin, for some reason that was never explained, perhaps by the same TNA management that forced us to have two shitty tournaments and has forced upon us red shirt security, it's possible that same TNA management said that Chris Sabin can pick his own opponent. Is that really the best they could do? Even with the opponent that they come with, they couldn't have just said that, oh, due to wins on Explosion, we're giving this guy a title match, even though we'll get to it. It's like, it is what it is. So then we ate up 3 minutes with a video package, which is usually a good idea, except this 3-minute video package was about Vince Russo. Fuck him. And then we get the official demotion of main event Glenn Gilberti. If you had any thoughts that maybe, okay, they spent 3 months pushing Glenn Gilberti as a top heel, and sure, he lost last week, but now that we've established him in the upper echelon, it's like, okay, he can be a jobber to the stars. He can have matches where he wins against lower card guys or mid card guys, and the point is he's now going to job out to every big name on the roster. Well, fuck that, because main event Glenn Gilberti comes out. And remember last week we said that nobody gave two shits about, the Glenn Gilberti world title match because everyone knew he wasn't going to win. Nobody gave two shits about this promo either.
No,
And
they didn't.
it's a shoot, bro, because he's talking about Montreal, bro, and he's talking about Judy Bagwell, bro. He's talking about David Arquette, bro, and he had a line that he thought you know that when him and Russo came up with this line, it's like, okay, the crowd is gonna pop big for this one. He said that for 3 years he's walked around like a jackass pretending that it was a good idea to put the world title on David Arquette. And the point of that was to pop the crowd. The crowd did not give a fuck. The crowd began chanting boring at him.
Yeah.
And
can I go back to something about this promo? When he says it was him
sure.
that screwed Brett, put the tag title on Judy Bagwell and Viagra on a pole. I have it written down in my notes.
Judy Bagwell was long before he was in WCW.
That was Bischoff. Vince McMahon did the screw job. Viagra on a pole. Well, okay, that was Russo.
Plus, it was Cornette's idea, even though he didn't think he'd actually do it. He literally said, put Shamrock in the ring with Brett and force, the finish. And a light bulb went off in Vince's head. So then, okay. Now, I've said a lot of mean things in the past 3 months. Because you mentioned last week, March 12th was the debut of the main event Glenn Gilberti push. I've said a lot of mean things for 3 months about Glenn Gilberti. I've questioned why the hell are we doing this? But the fact is, they did this. Glenn Gilberti has defeated a lot of names to get to this point. He beat Raven a few weeks ago. He beat Sabu. I guarantee if I went back, he beat a lot more names than that. But the point is, he still beat Raven and Sabu, even if that's all the people he beat.
He beat
Raven. I was about to say, I thought he beat AJ Styles, but I couldn't remember the match. He beat AJ Styles. He beat Sabu. And so now, Glenn Gilberti, standing in the ring, got laid the fuck out by Vince Russo because of course he fucking did. The biggest ego in wrestling history, Vince Russo made sure to book himself as not just the guy that handles who wins world title matches, but as the guy who is tough enough to stand up to the guy that earned a world title match by beating all these other top names. Vince Russo did that. And then, because that wasn't bad enough, because okay, fine. If you want to take into consideration the fact that I mocked the idea of pushing Disco Inferno as a main eventer, fine. That's all right. Pray tell, what happened next, Cindy? If I'll tell you, the Harrises ran down, and the Harrises are 6'5", 270-ish pound, biker dudes. Whether or not they could actually win a real fight, they look like fucking badasses. And, you wouldn't want to fuck with them, especially in a 2-on-1 situation. It took them multiple attempts to restrain Vince fucking Russo. Because Vince Russo, he's a badass. He's a bigger badass than every other badass on this show. And finally, after multiple attempts, the Harrises are finally able to drag Vince Russo away. And then Skipper and Daniels ran down to drag Glenn away. At this point, I'm ready to, if they come out and we get SCX Hollywood and SCX Wolfpack next week, I quit. And
spoiler alert, that doesn't happen.
Can I still quit?
No.
Fine. We find out later on in the show that Gilberti's taken to the hospital, and even later than that, we find out Desire went with him to the hospital, which was the writing off Desire from the show moment. So anyway, by the way, as you were going to say,
remember 2 weeks ago when you ranted about how they're not going to mention Vince Russo's kids again? And you said, I'll bet you $10 that they're not going to mention Vince Russo's kids.
Back there, but if I said that, I said I would bet you this, but it'll probably happen.
Pay up because it happened.
Yeah. So what was the follow up from that? But it's like, okay, so okay, fine. They mentioned it, but what was the point of it, or what was the follow up? It wasn't okay. Vince Russo went home and had a discussion with his kids, and he spent a few months reflecting on what it's like to be a man and a father, and yada yada. It's like, no, it was Jeff Jarrett did this, and now Vince Russo's back. The point of
that
having an angle and bringing, yeah, I'll pretend to give a shit next week. So then we get the debut of Scott Hudson, WCW Scott Hudson, who famously pissed off Bobby Heenan in WCW by openly saying that he would do this job for free. And Heenan's like, motherfucker, stop saying that, because then you run down the value of everybody else. Anyway, Scott Hudson.
Speaking of marks, can we say that Scott Hudson is a gigantic mark as well?
Well, duh.
Well, okay. You know how we mentioned the heel section on the show, how they can get kind of annoying?
Uh-huh.
Scott is part of the crew at Center Stage that was also really annoying. Remember the Tex Slazenger fans?
No, because I was convinced Tex Slazenger and Shanghai Pierce don't have fans.
That was Scott Hudson in '93.
Well, to be fair, all you have to do is read old Observers, and you can see many, many letters written by Scott Hudson. But anyway, Scott Hudson is here basically because Goldilocks has a match tonight, so it makes sense that she would also not be doing backstage promos. However, despite that, and despite the fact that Scott Hudson was openly telling people this was a temporary assignment, there were a lot of people backstage pissed off that Scott Hudson was brought in to do backstage interviews. Now, I was not one of them because Scott Hudson was better than Goldilocks on her best day. And by the way, Goldilocks' best day was like a few weeks after she debuted. Um, Although by the end of this show, and maybe like if I went back and count the number of times I say backstage Goldilocks is with, I wouldn't be so frustrated by this. But I feel like I wrote backstage Scott Hudson is with about 500 times on this show, and I was getting sick of it. Anywho, Scott Hudson interviewed Chris Sabin about his lack of title defenses. And by the way, I'll say this. Scott Hudson, whether or not he really was watching the show, he did fucking research. He knew what the hell he was talking about. He was not deer in the headlights, Scott, doing a backstage interview. Like he knew what he was talking about and, you know, displayed that here. It's not like all these celebrities who come out on Raw saying, "Oh, I'm a huge wrestling fan," and they've never watched wrestling before in their life, even if it turns out later on that they were in fact huge wrestling fans. No, this is a guy who actually at least did a good job of pretending that he watches the show if he doesn't actually watch the show. Anyway, Sabin says he searched all over the globe for one man to push him to the limit, and that man is going to be his challenger tonight, Shark Boy. We'll complain about that in a minute, but again, they couldn't just say, like, Shark Boy is getting a title match because he won matches on Explosion. No, we're saying Chris Sabin can pick his own opponent, so we're going to bury Shark Boy by having him be the guy lose the match. Keep in mind, because this is a burial. It's not like he picked Shark Boy because, oh man, Shark Boy is a legitimate top contender or whatever. No, they literally could have accomplished the same thing by having him wrestle one of the people who come in for the tryouts on Explosion. Like I didn't look to see who did the Explosion jobs this week, but I guarantee there was somebody in one of those matches they could have said, "Oh, and I'm going to wrestle Bill Jones this week." You're like, who the fuck is Bill Jones? And you have a scrawny geek come out and say he's Bill Jones. It's like,
Why couldn't you
you
get
know,
Damien Dothar back from last week?
there you go. You know what? And again, I'm giving too much credit to this thing. Because remember last week we talked about Kazarian coming in and having the nickname The Future? I'm like, okay, they're going to have like Chris Sabin, because like I'm a cocky motherfucker. I'm Chris Sabin, bitch. You know, I'm going to come in here and talk all this shit. And, I'm going to challenge this, new kid on the block. This guy who thinks he's a bad guy, badass Frankie Kazarian. And I'm going to show him what the future really is. The overconfident heel thing. No, instead it was I'm gonna bury Shark Boy by pointing out that he's the biggest loser in the X division, and I'm gonna beat him in a I was it clean? I guess we'll see in a minute. I'm gonna beat him relatively clean in an X division title match instead of just accomplishing the same thing with some local jabroni. So anyway, speaking of our favorite tag team of all time, New Jack and Shark Boy are playing Twister, which included Shark Boy putting his ass in New Jack's face. Jack told Shark Boy if he isn't back from his match in 5 minutes, he will come kick Shark Boy's ass. Which leads us to the X Division title match, Chris Sabin versus Shark Boy. And they announce here, and I'm a little surprised by this. Now I know this is 2003, so it's not even a couple years later when there's an overabundance of pay-per-view channels. So there's not a whole lot, but they announce here that TNA is now going to have an immediate replay on Wednesday nights. So 10 p.m. Eastern time. So like now people on the West Coast, because apparently there was only one showing a week from 8 to 10. So if you're on the West Coast, it's at 5 p.m. Like that seems like an obvious thing to do is having an immediate replay of a live sports event. Because you would think that would just by itself, increase the buy. Hell, I had an aunt who used to buy the WWF shows at 11 p.m. because she worked until 10:30 and thus couldn't watch the live show at 8. So,
Makes sense.
And again, this isn't modern day where, okay, if I miss the live show, I can just go back, pull up Peacock. Well, not even Peacock. I can go to Triller and buy the pay-per-view replay after it ends. No, like in this day, it's like shows aired at a certain time, and if you missed it and you wanted to watch it, you had to wait for the VHS tape to come out, unless it's TNA who didn't really do that. You would think though, because and I mean, I don't know if I'm sure they will mention it on the show, but over the years, they do a lot of attempts to putting all the old shows on the website for you to buy and watch, like in an on-demand thing. And that was kind of how I discovered TNA was they had free matches, and one of them was that AJ D'Lo match I talked about. But yeah. So anyway, so we're now going to have a replay airing, which you would think would theoretically increase the buy rate of the show, because at least now the West Coast people could watch it in a prime time slot. But spoiler, it really doesn't. So anyway, Tenay and West try explaining we shouldn't take Shark Boy lately. He's a very capable wrestler. Now, I'm not going to say Shark Boy is not a competent wrestler, because he is. The problem is, and I went back just to double check this to confirm, Shark Boy is a gimmick who, on the TNA pay-per-views, has never won a match. He's been in 6-man tags. He's been in 4-way tag matches. He's been in 2-on-2 tag matches. He's been in matches where he doesn't have to win in order to win. He has never won a match on TNA pay-per-view. Now, Cindy, to answer the question I'm sure you're going to bring up in a second, yes, he has won matches on Explosion. But you know what show we don't watch? Explosion. You know what they also don't do? They don't tell you the results of Explosion. Like, remember when Dark used to be a thing, and AEW would put the results of Dark on the bottom crawler, so if you didn't watch, you'd be like, oh, so and so won a match on Dark. Like, they don't even do that. So Explosion doesn't count. Shark Boy has never won a match on this show, and now he's getting an X Division title match. At one point, Sharky does a springboard one-legged drop kick. Honestly, I think he was going for a springboard splash, but I think Sabin was a little too far away, so it ended up as a one-legged drop kick instead. Sabin blocks a Hurricane Rana and turns that into a backbreaker. Shark Boy hits the Dead Sea Drop, but Sabin gets his foot on the ropes and then wins with a Future Shock. So yes, it was a clean finish. After the match, Sabin tries to unmask Shark Boy, but 5 minutes is up, so New Jack storms out for the save. Mike Sanders runs in to attack New Jack from behind since they have their Hard 10 match next week, and both he and Sabin stomp Jack in the corner. This was not a bad match, but in a very similar way to last week's Jeff Jarrett Glenn Gilberti match, no one bought any of the near falls because nobody bought Shark Boy as someone who's going to win this match and the title. 4.0 out of 10.
And it's gave it a 6 out of 10 because it wasn't the typical X Division style match, but it was still pretty good. And Shark Boy, during the match, you're like, maybe he could do it. Maybe Shark Boy could win. But then the stuff at the end, it's sort of like this match was kind of a means to an end. It was just to get some heat on the New Jack Mike Sanders Hard 10 match.
It was the original plan was Chris Sabin, Paul London. And I get, London ended up being in a tour of Japan instead. They didn't announce this match last week. So for all we know, this is just a bullshit line just to delay that match another week. So in my mind, they could have had Shark Boy on last week's match or last week's show just to win a fucking match. It's like have him win one fucking match. So then you could at least have that as an excuse, okay, now, he deserves an X Division title match, even if Chris Sabin's still picking him as a joke. Because at the end of the day, it's better to wrestle a guy who was 1-49 as opposed to 0-50. Anyway, backstage, Scott Hudson.
Little Mac got his start in the WBBA with 1-99 Glass Joe.
There you go. And my brother always managed to make Glass Joe 2-99. Scott Hudson was with Conan and Ron Killings, who are wrestling the Harrisees tonight. Conan said the Harrisees don't associate with people who spank that ass. I mean, there's probably a good reason for that. Now, there was apparently a segment taped with the Harrises and BG James where they had an argument, and that was to be a setup to what happens in this next match. But for some reason, that segment never aired. So this next, what happens next, basically comes out of nowhere. So then we get Ron and Don Harris versus Conan and Ron Killings. Borash said Ron and Don weigh over 600 pounds. Could he not have just gotten a calculator and added their weights together? Plus,
Well, it is
I mean,
Don West after all. He does overinflate the values of things that are kind of
it
useless.
it was Borash. It wasn't Don West.
Just take out when I said Don West and put Borash in, and you get the same thing.
Plus, and I mean, I'm always bad at estimating things like people's weights, etc. The Harris twins are not 300 pounds each. They're like 265, I'd say, which is still, large, but like stand them next to Brock Lesnar, who's like, legit like 290, and tell me that the Harrises weigh more than Brock Lesnar.
Aren't the Heresies taller than Brock Lesnar, though?
Yes, but not by a whole lot. Brock's like 6'3" and they're 6'5". There's like 2 inches does not make up for all that
Right.
thickness.
So
Um,
we have the match,
so
and I'm just going to give you my score right now. It was the definition of a 4 out of 10 match.
apparently you and I are going to a different dictionary.
Because we haven't said this in a few months. I think it's repeating now for episode 200. I am not a professional or even amateur wrestling critic. I don't have a book that talks about all of the pay-per-views from 1985 to 1990 like Aria does.
By the way, Jeff
For
Bezos
me,
sent me my pizza money last week, so I was happy.
like, I don't do star ratings. I just go by feel and what I think about the match. So
Which
this was
by
kind of
which by the
a
way is essentially what a star rating is. But
meh,
anyway, go ahead.
just a below average, take it or leave it match.
Hmm? So Ron and Don start the match. Mind you, this is a TNA show, so if I told you this tag team match started with Ron Harris and Don Harris wrestling each other, would that really surprise you?
No,
Uh, Conan attempted to pull Ron Harris's head into his crotch, and if there's one thing the Harrises hate more than black people, it's gay people. Actually, that's not entirely true because they picked Clay Aiken over Ruben Studdard. But finally, the Harrises got the heat on Truth. Conan got the hot tag, and a four-way broke out. Conan and Don fight outside while BG James runs down and hits Ron Harris with a chair, letting Truth get the pin. This was certainly a match that happened. 1.5 out of 10.
so BG James does come out, and this is it. This is kind of the start of the formation of Three Live Crew.
I mean, wasn't like I know there was more to it than this because he was feuding with his brother and his father. Wasn't like the last time BG on the show he was feuding with the Truth? Not that it matters because it doesn't. None of that shit really matters. But yeah,
Yeah, because the storyline was crap, and even so, I think even Russo says, "Nah, we're not going to bring that up again."
if Vince Russo remembers it, I'd give you 30 cents. Um, Earlier today talked to Jeff Jarrett about tonight's three-way match. Jarrett said he's defended the title all over the world and that AJ and Raven are his toughest opponents. Both are unique athletes, and this three-way is his toughest challenge. Today brings up TNA officials being mad at the way Jeff Jarrett has been behaving and treating this as a punishment. It took Jeff Jarrett 45 seconds and 350 words to agree that this was a punishment. Tenay asked him about Russo, And Jarrett said that he has no relationship with Russo now or in the future. While he technically did also say that he had nothing to do with Russo last week, he did not say he didn't have a relationship with Russo in the past, even the recent past. Which, by the way, don't read into anything into that because it really doesn't matter. Just me reading something into something that isn't there. Any thoughts on this stupendous Mike Tenay, Jeff Jarrett promo?
No, I didn't care.
I was most disappointed that apparently Mike Tenay does not show up at the arena in his tuxedo. He was in a polo shirt and chinos. And yes, for those curious, I truly believe Don West would walk around wearing his loud shirts all the time. You cannot
No, this
convince
was
me that he did.
2003. He was wearing his throwback Washington Huskies jersey.
I refuse to believe that, or I choose to believe that Don West walks around all the time in shiny button-down shirts and matching ties. And hey,
Speaking of shiny ties,
if there's something about pro wrestling that I can believe in, I want to believe that Scott Hudson, Jesus Christ, that Don West wears shiny shirts and matching ties. Scott Hudson is now with Eric Watts, Trinity, and Goldilocks. Watts said he would never put Goldilocks in danger since that may mess things up with him. The same Eric Watts that put Goldilocks in a closet 2 weeks ago doesn't want to put her in danger now. Trinity said she was from New York when Eric Watts was attacked by Prince Justice, who was last seen on the very first TNA show and apparently also did a explosion match last week that the crowd shit all over him. So, well, all I gotta say is you can't always listen to what this stupid crowd thinks. Justice picked up Eric Watts and threw him headfirst into the wall and then left. And then what might be the most unintentionally funny thing that has ever happened on this show, Kid Cash walked up and it wasn't funny. It was like, oh no, what happened? No, the funny part was when he introduced himself to Scott Hudson and reached out to shake his hand and Scott Hudson shook his hand. I'm like, that was nice of Cash to follow the wrestler's code and shaking everyone's hand backstage.
mm-hmm.
Now, of course, this was the debut of Abyss. And I will get to it, but like this is not like if your introduction to TNA was the Impact era, like mine was, and a lot of people's was, this isn't black shirt, black leather pants Abyss. This is he fell out of the denim tree Abyss. Forget what pants he's wearing, but he's wearing a denim shirt, and it's like it just doesn't look right. And he's gonna have that shirt on for like most, at least I think like the next year, but I guess we'll see. But he has it on for a while. Anyway, thoughts on Abyss's debut here?
It really put him over as a monster because he took out Eric Watts, who's 6'6", who's essentially one of the tallest people on the roster. Even though Eric Watts, he says that he called himself Mr. Explosion. So I guess he wrestled exclusively on Explosion, I guess.
Yep, he's been in a lot of Explosion matches since he returned. I think this was his first pay-per-view match. Like even when he was with Lawler and Flair, it's like I don't remember him ever actually wrestling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he always showed up around the crowd or running interference, but that's it.
So then, because Eric Watts is injured and unable to wrestle, we then get a 2-on-1 handicap match with Kid Cash versus Goldilocks and Trinity. Now, me being the hey, this is a shoot bro person, the match contract for this match was a 3-on-1 handicap match. Since Eric Watts is not here, that should immediately invalidate the contract because the terms of the contract would not have been met. Now, that is the end of me attempting to make any sense out of anything on this show. So, Trinity, who, let's say she needs to go back to school and learn how to run the ropes, but that was the least of her issues here. But she ran off the ropes and hit an arm drag, which I gotta say, I've never seen anybody run the ropes and do an arm drag to a standing opponent. So Kid Cash gets the heat on Trinity, and I was hoping, begging, pleading that we'd get a Goldilocks hot tag, which sadly did not happen. Now, Kid Cash, spoiler, he carries this to an acceptable match. Kid Cash realized, okay, we need to keep this shit simple because Trinity is cold as fuck right now because she can't cut promos and she can't do matches. So we're having her cut promos and wrestle matches. So Kid Cash does the most simple move in wrestling history to Trinity, the Iron Claw. But Goldie breaks that up. So Kid Cash puts the claw on her, and then Goldilocks shows us exactly how effective that move is because she immediately gives Cash an uppercut to the balls. Kid Cash goes up top for the blonde bombshell to Trinity, but Trinity reversed that into a Hurricane Rana off the top rope, which was spectacular. And thankfully, the fucking crowd popped for that because that is not a fucking easy move to do or take. And I would have, you know, I would have told this crowd to fuck off if they would have, not reacted for it. Then, okay, I get that Kid Cash is a heel bro, but Kid Cash, a fully trained, full-sized pro wrestler. Now, admit it, like we said last week, he's not huge. He is an X Division wrestler, but he's, 5'9", 5'10", 180 pounds. He's muscular. He's in shape. He looks like, if he's gonna fight a woman, you know, and it's a normal sized woman, even one who's in shape, he's not gonna have a trouble beating up a woman. Now, again, not something you want to be saying, but again, that's the match. He's wrestling a woman who is smaller than him, and even if she does have some skill, at the end of the day, it's a man's world, you know? But Kid Cash could not beat these two normal sized women by himself, and instead, including, by the way, one of the two normal sized women that he couldn't beat was the announcer. Instead, he needed the 6'8", 350-pound monster Abyss to come out and give Trinity a black hole slam, which let Kid Cash get the win. Why? Because again, man beating up women. In fact, we're not even like, fine, you want to take man beating up woman in this match because it's a match, so fine, a man is beating up a woman because that's as part of the actual match. Fine. We then didn't need the 350-pound man, giving her, his finish. But yeah, but again, another instance of men beating up women on this show in a spot that will be forgotten and no one will ever bring up ever again. And Kid Cash carried them to an acceptable match. I gave it a 2.5 out of 10, but you're telling me there was no better way to debut Abyss. Hey, the actual debut of Abyss beating up Eric Watts, fine. It's leading to an Abyss Eric Watts match, and who the hell would want to watch that? But at least, it was him beating up a very large man. We did not need him to beat up the tiny woman. He could have just never been seen again on this week's show. Kid Cash could have just won this match, and we could have all moved on with our lives. And then next week, cut a promo about how, oh, look how great I am. I won the 3-on-1 handicap match. And Eric Watts is like, motherfucker, you didn't win a 3-on-1 handicap match. You beat two women, and one is a backstage announcer. But nope, we can't have that. Your thoughts on another Vince Russo special?
I mean, it wasn't great. It was, at least it was a kind of a make good for the awful match that happened last week, 2 weeks ago.
Right? Oh, the Kid Cash Trinity match. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, there's too many awful matches on the show. We got to be specific.
So
Um,
at least we got a decent match out of this.
we had a perfectly acceptable match. What was your rating on this perfectly acceptable match?
A 3 out of 10.
All right. So remember last week when we told you that Sandman would be wrestling question mark in the Hard 10 tournament, and well, by we I mean I openly debated with myself whether or not it would have been better to just say who it was, but at the same time, A, did they know who it was, and B, would saying who it was would that really have sold any buys, while doing a random mystery opponent may have got some curiosity. And so Scott Hudson introduces the Sandman's opponent, Devon Storm, the former Crowbar in WCW. And Devon talks. He talks about how he took into Sandman's weight, his blood alcohol level, and the weather into consideration to determine how he would win this Hard 10 match tonight. Any thoughts on this tremendous promo?
I liked how he shut down uh, Scott Hudson when it came to we're not measure. This is scientific. We're measuring in kilograms, not pounds. So at least that was something.
You got to get enjoyment any way you can out of this show. I was personally hoping for his Gordon Soley impersonation, but nope, couldn't have that one.
Nope.
All right. So remember last week when we talked about the red shirt security and we talked about, you know, that it they're the most that in a world full of incompetent security, these guys are pretty goddamn bad. And they're brought in to punish Jeff Jarrett and also restore order, backstage and in TNA. And of course, the first thing, like we said, they did was lead Sandman into the crowd where he could just interfere later after the match. So we then get the peak. Well, I don't know it's peak at this point, but 2 weeks in, this is a pretty goddamn incompetent moment here for our security team. Bill Behrens is backstage, flanked by two large fat men in red shirt security shirts. And it's not even like last week was Kevin Northcutt. Neither of these men were Kevin Northcutt. Um, Two large fat men. It may be the Phi Delta Slam guys, but I don't think so because they weren't that fat. Um, and they're there to inform D'Lo Brown that TNA officials, by the way, TNA official Bill Behrens is saying this, that D'Lo Brown needs to leave because TNA officials don't want him there and interfering in the main event. D'Lo said that his ass is going to interfere in the main event. TNA being TNA, sound edited the word event instead of the word ass. D'Lo said that redshirt security aren't Patterson and Briscoe because, again, the real stars are in the WWE. The security guards then showed how useless they are because, okay, here's what I didn't mention. They did this standing in front of the doors to the exit of the arena. And D'Lo Brown, after telling them that he's going to do this anyway, just walked by them and continued back into the locker room area.
Yeah, we're gonna find out over the next few months that they're pretty useless.
I didn't even remember really the specifics of this. I just remember that they did a dumb feud with red shirt security and black shirt security. And I kind of just assumed that the red shirts were pushed harder than the black shirts, even though it's a total Star Trek thing. So the red shirts, in theory, would be uh whatchamacallit, would be ones getting their asses kicked every chance they got. And by the way, I'm kind of half paying attention to the NBA game going on right now, and an Indiana Pacer like fell down, and they're not even stopping the game, while he's writhing on the ground, grabbing his knee. And I didn't even see which one it was, but I'm like, what the hell? And I thought TNA referees sucked. Uh,
Oh, they
yeah,
got
I still
nothing on
can't.
NBA referees, especially this postseason.
I still can't even see who that is. Um, somebody on the Pacers injured their knee. So if we don't see this in 2 weeks, someone on the Pacers may have injured their knee and is out for a while. And if that happens, shoot, this is when we were talking about it, or when it happened.
Oh, and fuck the Oklahoma City Thunder. They should still be the Sonics.
I'm like, mind you, they have enough. Like, NBA has enough teams, and like they hear the NFL think about adding teams. Like, they have enough teams too. But like I hear that the NBA wants to add teams, and I'm more surprised like they never put another team in Seattle. Like, you know, but whatever. So then we get the Sandman versus Devin Storm in a hard 10 match. The last time Storm was here, he was Tempest as part of the Disciples of the New Church. And then remember 3 weeks ago when this tournament started and I asked you, can you use the same weapon more than once? Or is it you hit the guy with the weapon and then that weapon can't be used again? You just move to a different weapon. And since nobody ever used the same weapon more than once, I just assumed that even though they never say it, that's the rule. You can only use a weapon once, and then once that weapon is used, you can't use it again. Well, Devin Storm and the Sandman became the first two people to use the same weapon more than once, as they used the same Singapore cane to hit each other 7 times. Siaki then rolled out a shopping cart full of non-strategically placed weapons to the ring. And I don't know, did they take anything out of this thing?
No, they didn't.
Okay, so what the hell was the point? So
Well,
Storm,
I guess it
so
was just
again,
a taunt Sandman because whoever won this was going to fight Siaki in the semifinals.
so again, in case you haven't been listening or paying attention to this stupid show, um, you get a point for using what's called a strategically placed weapon. And their definition of a strategically placed weapon is basically they give the fans in the crowd weapons to hand to wrestlers when they ask for them. Okay, I, it's a we'll give it to them, whatever. I think it's unnecessarily complicated, but at least fan involvement, all that bullshit. And like they're giving them stuff like trash can lids and shit like that. It's like, okay, whatever. Well, apparently they gave four of them a fucking ladder to hold because either Storm or Sam, I don't even write who did this. Storm brought a ladder from over the barricade into the ring, and that counted as a strategically placed weapon, meaning the TNA officials gave a bunch of people in the front row a ladder to hold for someone to get involved with. So then, because this stupid thing is not stupid enough, um, Devin Storm throws Sandman into the ladder, which is propped up in the corner. Because Devin Storm did not use it as a weapon to hit Sandman with, that did not count as a point for Devin Storm. However, seconds later, Sandman first suplexed Storm onto it and then bulldogged him onto it, which both earned him a point. Please explain to me how. Because, okay, it's not like, okay, it's a good thing they didn't call it a point because at the end of this match, like if they would have counted as a point, Devin Storm would have accidentally won. Like I lost track of the points, but I think it ended as 11-8. So Devin Storm could have gotten that extra point and been at 11-9 and still lost. Um, and then you ever notice every match ends in a table bump? And I guess like okay, it's fine. That's the most exciting part of a match. But like again, if this is a shoot, bro, why wouldn't I just hit you with a Singapore cane 10 times and win the damn match? But anyway, Sandman won by doing a senton off the ladder through Storm on the table for the win. And Sandman was beating up Sonny Siaki outside the ring, and so you didn't see this, but I'm assuming it was Devin Storm because otherwise it was the referee who did it. They had a ladder bridge set up between the apron and the barricade, and Devin Storm, to give sturdiness to the table, because that table looked like it was falling apart just looking at it, they put the ladder on the edge of the table to kind of keep it in place so it doesn't fall down and fall apart. So we'll call that a smart move. After the match, Siaki caned Sandman and spat beer at him because, yes, they're the semifinals in 2 weeks. Another pointless exhibition, 2.0 out of 10.
And yet, this probably is the second best hard 10 match we'll get out of this tournament. Because these two actually know how to put on a decent match.
By the way, remember last week when Vampire Warrior did some move and then went for the pin? Devon Storm did some move and went for the pin. And by the way, just like how Vampire Warrior was frustrated by this stupid set of rules, so was Devon Storm. Anyway, then we had the return. We didn't get TNA talk as promised last week. And instead, we got the return of the other dumb segment in TNA, the interrogation with Justin Credible and Jerry Lynn. Here, I'll make this simple. They both love ECW and consider it the best point of their career, even though Jerry Lynn has been in TNA for a year now, because, again, this is not where the stars are. This is where, they go because there's nowhere better to be. Jerry Lynn said he preferred Slater over Metallica, which pissed off Justin. And then Lynn said that he didn't get paid in ECW because Paul Heyman was having gay sex with Justin. Justin did not take that very well, and they fought into the empty seats. And that is not the exact phrasing they used, but it wasn't that far off of the exact phrasing that they used.
Now we have Thoughts Scott Hudson.
No comment?
Don't care. I was playing Brotato during this time, so I tuned out this. Actually, no, I take that back. I skipped this segment.
I was about to say, you played a game for 45 seconds.
I play the game while I'm watching TNA.
So I'm going to say something nice about the next segment, the Scott Hudson interview with Tracy. Tracy Brooks became the first person to actually say that they wanted to win the tournament and get a tag team title match. We had 16 people in this tournament, 18 if you include AJ and D'Lo, who had a qualifying match, and the first person to, at any point, to say that they wanted to win so they can get a title match was Tracy Brooks, seconds before the final match.
Better late than never.
Let that sink in for a minute. And then Triple X came to ringside to observe the finals of the worst tournament ever. And then, following up my rule last week where I refused to watch these fucking matches or talk about more than the very basic that you have to talk about, America's Most Wanted defeated David and Tracy in the finals of the worst tournament ever, a.k.a. the Asylum Alliance tournament. Cindy, your thoughts on this magnificent piece of business?
It was essentially a David Young handicap match with distractions by Tracy and Elix Skipper. By the way, Elix Skipper did a buckshot lariat during this match. It was really impressive. It didn't change the end result, though. I think everybody knew what was going to be the end result. AMW wins, 3 out of 10. Meh. Now, I want to note something about the episodes the versions of the show that I watched and Aria watched, because we watched the same ones. During this match, the audio started to cut. Turns out it was just our copies from the cable company, or when it was originally recorded in 2003. Because apparently on TNA Plus, the full audio is there.
Well, either way, we basically had no real audio until the main event. But let's see here. Storm said they wanted to do something that caused the Elix Skipper to try to hit the ring, but held back by Daniels and security. David Young then threw Tracy into the turnbuckles, so Nurse Veronica ran down and hit David Young with a chair. So, yeah, the one team that kind of got along in this tournament had to split up at the end. And yeah, so as unnecessary, yeah, in
Two teams.
unnecessary, an unnecessarily
You're forgetting
convoluted
BG
way,
James and Conan.
an unnecessarily convoluted way to have AMW get a title match instead of just playing it straight. Because again, they could have just played it straight and given us 8 teams and had an actual tournament. We got this bullshit. And as much as I'm complaining, AJ Styles and D'Lo Brown and AMW had to qualify for this bullshit tournament. Um, if you still wanted to say, okay, we needed to split up AJ and D'Lo so we could move to the next thing, you could have had them in the first round of the actual fucking tournament, And then, like I said, there was Just Incredible and Jerry Lynn. There was BG James and Conan. Either of those teams could have at least gotten to the finals and had a good match with AMW. But we couldn't fucking do that. We had to have the finals of this tournament for a title shot to be between the guy who's, I get it's not right now, but the guy who's famous for being the guy who loses all the time in TNA and the large breasted woman who, this is like the most matches she's ever fucking done in this promotion because, like, there's years that go by without her wrestling. Um, and yeah, that is the finals of this tournament for a title shot. And again, I can go down the roster and we could have found a way to get 6 or 7 other teams that and actually have a tournament that now even if it's well known in advance who's going to win, like this was, like you could have at least done something to try to elevate it. Instead, you had a tournament for a tag team title match where 5 out of the 8 teams did not want to win. Anyway, this is the last time you will ever hear me talk about this fucking tournament ever again.
It's because there was no need for it ever again. It was like Battle Bowl done worse. I'm not talking about the good Battle Bowl. I'm talking about the awful Battle Bowl from like Starrcade 92. And they had all those stupid qualifying matches drawn out.
Scott Hudson was now with AJ Styles, and again, due to the audio issues, I got no idea what was said. However,
apparently I figured out what happened. Ring of the Hawk, Barky D123 did a review of the show, so I saw it. Turns out he was saying that D'Lo Brown made him a man and that his life was filled because of D'Lo or something like that. It was awful. And he said it was kind of proof why AJ needed a mouthpiece at this time. Kind of right, though.
Yeah. So Scott Hudson was, I already said that, sorry. Next week, we'll have Sting's first appearance in TNA. And I gotta say, I'm at least happy that they plugged it here. Mind you, and I imagine it had to have been a last minute thing, because as we said, they've been throwing out 8 million ideas for the anniversary show. So I imagine they did not know it far enough in advance, but it's like, this is something like if they would have built it up for 3 or 4 weeks, like when they first announced the 1-year anniversary show, it'd have been like, okay, they might pop a buy rate. They might sell the place out with legitimate paid tickets, and I guess we'll see how next week does. But instead of like really, building this shit up, it's like, well, we're going to say it right before the final segment on the show. And then we'll book his match. Okay, I'll say this. At least they booked the fucking match too before the show ended. So we'll say so. At least it's not just those things going to be here, so we can cut a 90-second promo and get beaten up by Vince Russo or some shit. So we know he has a match too. So hooray for that. Then we get our main event is NWA World's Heavyweight Champion Jeff Jarrett versus Raven versus AJ Styles I note that while the audio wasn't perfect, it did get fixed during the AJ Styles entrance. So the match starts with Jarrett and Raven double-teaming AJ and throwing him to the floor. AJ did not approve of such shenanigans and rolled right back in. Good for him. Outside the ring, AJ repositioned the steps and dove off of them, but Raven moved and AJ crashed into the barricade. Poor AJ, ain't nothing going right for him tonight. Raven put Jarrett in the worst STF I've ever seen, and that includes every John Cena version of it. This was the absolute worst STF ever. AJ was
You want
so
to know who
offended
needed to
by
teach him to do a proper STF?
Shono.
Eric Watts.
Hell yeah, Eric Watts could do a decent STF. Let it be said, the only nice thing I'll ever say about Eric Watts. Where the hell was I? Okay, AJ was so offended by that awful STF that when Raven went for a DDT a minute later, AJ concussed him with a chair. Raven finally gave Jarrett a DDT when Shane Douglas, of all people, ran down and yanked Raven away, fighting him into the crowd and out the doors. Well, Shane Douglas is definitely not D'Lo Brown, so that's apparently allowed. Because, oh yeah, by the way, D'Lo never comes out here. Now, a couple things before we get into the finish of the match. Raven wanted it to be Sabu, but Jeff Jarrett is not a fan of Sabu, saying that Sabu has now burned them 3 times, and so fuck Sabu. And also, they'd been negotiating with Shane Douglas for a few weeks, and you know, and he was supposed to come in a couple of weeks ago, but he was sick, and he actually lost a ton of weight in like 3 weeks because he was so sick, and so he actually looks half decent here, much more half decently than he did a few weeks earlier, anyway. So Shane and Raven are now going to feud, leading to the most disgusting moment in TNA history. Not because it's disgustingly booked, but because it's just disgusting, visually. And if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. If not, you have something to look forward to.
Yep.
So the finish, once we got to AJ Styles and Jeff Jarrett, and not saying that Raven was taking the match down or anything, but once we got to AJ versus Jeff Jarrett, it got pretty good here. We had a lot of back and forth. AJ used a D'Lo Brown frog splash for a 2 count. Jarrett had AJ up for the Falcon Arrow, but ran to the referee. Jarrett got his knees up on a springboard 450 splash. And of course, it's a world title match. It's a main event. And the biggest ego in pro wrestling has to determine the winner. Out comes Vince Russo with a guitar. And there is not a single human being who did not know what was about to happen. Because after last week where he helped Jeff Jarrett win his match, guess what happened this week? He helped Jeff Jarrett lose his match. Because it's a swerve, bro. He aimed it at AJ, and of course turned around and clonked Jarrett with it. And what I imagine was supposed to be a callback to the finish with Jarrett and Ron Killings back in November. AJ then gave Jarrett a Styles Clash to win the match and the title, because every fucking title match, or every fucking title change has to revolve around this douchebag. And this is a faux pas, but I wrote winner Vince Russo. After the match, because again, then the announcers were told to do this. They were concentrating far more on Russo than AJ winning the fucking world title. Russo was the one holding the belt and celebrating with it. And then so Jarrett gets on the mic and wants a rematch next week. AJ says no. So instead, they're going to have a tag team match where Jarrett teams with Sting. I gave this match, because again, Vince Russo has to ruin everything. I gave this match a 5.0 out of 10.
I gave it a 6 out of 10, so we're not too far off. I thought it was pretty solid. You know who ruined it for me, though? this match?
Shane Douglas.
Yeah, Shane Douglas. Because Shane Douglas ruins everything.
I forgot to mention this. He put Raven's head through a table while they're trying to fight out the back door, and I'm pretty sure that was an accident. I don't even think they were supposed to go through the table, but like he was trying to drag uh Raven along, and like they tripped and he fell headfirst through a table. Um, but yeah, that's the end of this show, and that is the end of the season finale of TNA. 1 full year of this show we have just completed.
What a roller coaster ride, huh?
So also next week, in addition to the Jarrett, or not, in addition to the tag match, I'm sorry, I almost said the wrong main event. In addition to the tag match, we're also going to have Chris Sabin versus Paul London and Triple X versus AMW. If it was any other promotion, I would say that is one guaranteed hell of a fucking show. Um, but because this is TNA and I'm just convinced that it's going to get fucked up somehow, some way, future build is only a 6.5 out of 10, even though just listening to the sound of it sounds like a hell of a show. Match quality 3.17, overall enjoyment 3.0 out of 10. Nothing about this show could just stand on its own 2 feet. Everything had to be overbooked even when it wasn't necessary, giving us an overall rating of a 4.22.
This was one of the better shows, actually. I mean, you at least had some decent matches strung around, and you had AJ actually winning the belt. Sure, it's with Russo El Kabonging Jarrett, but the seeds were planted for where Styles was going to join up with Russo. And these seeds were planted like in February.
And the thing with a seed, you have to water it. It was not watering the seed by having AJ turn face and team with D'Lo Brown for, uh, for a month. That's not watering a seed. That is making you pretend that the seed was never planted.
It's Bizarro World, or it's a desert. They don't need much water.
So,
AJ Styles is so good he doesn't need water.
so that's going to do it for TNA, episode number 49. And again, we've somehow gone to 200 episodes. By the way, remember how people used to whine and bitch about Taylor Swift at every Kansas City Chiefs game being shown on TV? Caitlin Clark has been shown on TV about 35 times tonight. Um, in case, you're somebody who gives a shit about that. Anyway, that's going to do it for TNA. By the way, I think Caitlin Clark might be younger than TNA. Let that sink in for you. That's going to do it for this week's episode of Something Else. We lived, we learned, we tried to laugh, but that does it. Hope you all enjoyed the show. We'll talk to you again as we start year 2 of TNA in 7 days.
Caitlin Clark is older than TNA by 5 months.
Bye.